The champagne bubbles caught the morning light as I raised my glass to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below me, 3 black SUVs sat in my circular driveway, not guests arriving, but lawyers leaving. My phone buzzed with the 7th missed call from David. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to my safe, still open from an hour before, and touched the stack of documents that had been hidden there for 37 years. The paper felt different now, not like a burden, but like wings. In 12 hours, my family would gather for New Year's Eve, expecting to find a broken old woman. They would find something else entirely. My name is Margaret Chen Williams, and at 72, I thought I knew exactly who I was. The accommodating mother, the reliable grandmother. The woman who always said yes, even when it cost me everything. I was wrong. This story begins 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was watering my orchids in the sunroom of my Carmel Valley home, watching the December fog roll over the hills I'd called home for 4 decades. The phone rang at exactly 8:47 a.m. I remember because I was thinking how my late husband James used to say that Tuesday mornings held either the best news or the worst, never anything in between. Mrs. Williams? The voice was crisp, professional. This is Patricia Valdez from Coastal Elite Rentals. I'm calling about your Mendocino property. I set down my watering can. The Mendocino Villa, my pride and my primaries. Income since James died 5 years ago. A 6-bedroom masterpiece perched on bluffs overlooking the Pacific, booked solid through next summer. Of course, Patricia. How can I help you? I'm afraid we need to discuss your New Year's booking. The Morrison family? My stomach tightened. The Morrisons, a tech executive and his wife who'd booked the villa for a week-long celebration. $90,000. Money I'd already mentally allocated to my granddaughter Emma's college fund and the new roof. The cottage desperately needed. What about them? They're requesting a full refund and cancellation. Apparently there's been a family situation. I sank into James's old leather chair, the one I'd kept in the sunroom because it still smelled faintly of his cologne. What kind of situation? Patricia's pause stretched too long. Mrs. Williams, I think it's better if you speak with them directly. But I wanted to give you a heads up. They're citing false advertising in their cancellation request. False advertising? I'd owned and operated that villa for 12 years. Every photograph was current, every amenity exactly as described. My 5-star rating was spotless. I don't understand. Apparently the property isn't what they expected for a mature family gathering. The words hit me like ice water. Mature family gathering. I knew exactly what that meant, and more importantly, I knew exactly who had told them. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number. Hi, Mom. My son David's voice carried that particular tone, the one he used when he was about to ask for something or deliver bad news. Usually both. David, I kept my voice level. I just had an interesting call from my rental company. Oh, right. About that. He cleared his throat. Look, Mom, I can explain. I'm sure you can. The thing is, Jessica and I were talking with Emma and Michael about New Year's plans, and we thought it might be nice to do something special this year. You know, since it's been rough since Dad died and all. I waited. James had taught me that silence was often more powerful than words, so we looked into renting your villa. But when we called, they told us you already had it booked. For $90,000, Mom. $90,000. That's correct. Jesus, I had no idea you were charging that much. I mean, we're family. There it was. The expectation that had shaped 45 years of our relationship. Family meant free. Family meant Margaret gives and everyone else takes. David, that villa is my primary source of income. You know this. I know. But here's the thing. Jessica had this brilliant idea. We could all chip in for the rental, make it a real family reunion. Emma's bringing her new boyfriend, Michael's bringing Sarah. It'll be perfect. Something cold settled in my chest. And the Morrisons? Another pause. Well, that's where it gets a little complicated. We may have mentioned to them that the property wasn't really suitable for a mature crowd. You know, with all the stairs and the hot tub situation and everything, we thought they'd want to cancel anyway. The hot tub situation. I'd installed that hot tub specifically for guests with mobility issues. A shallow entry, safety rails, everything. My hands began to shake. You sabotaged my booking. Mom, don't be dramatic. We just gave them some additional information to help them make an informed decision. $90,000. David. Look, we'll pay you. Not the full amount, obviously, because family discount, but we'll make it fair. Maybe $30,000? That's more than fair for family. I looked out at my orchids, their delicate petals trembling in the morning breeze. Some of them I'd been nurturing for 20 years. They required patience, consistency, the right balance of attention and space. I'd been giving my family the wrong balance for decades. Let me understand this correctly, I said slowly. You contacted my paying guests and convinced them to cancel a $90,000 booking so that you could rent the property from me for $30,000. When you put it like that, it sounds like what it is. Mom, come on, we're family. And honestly, Jessica thinks it's time you stopped working so hard anyway. You're 72. You should be slowing down, not running around playing landlord. Playing landlord. As if my successful property management business was a hobby. As if the income that kept me independent was disposable. I need to think about this, David. Great. So you'll do it? I'll call you back. I hung up before he could respond and sat in the silence of my sunroom, surrounded by 30 years of carefully tended plants. Outside, the fog was beginning to lift, revealing the mountains beyond. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about what my family needed from me. I was thinking about what I needed for myself, and what I needed was to understand exactly how far this betrayal went. I spent the next hour calling Patricia back, then the Morrisons directly. What I learned made my morning coffee taste like ash. David hadn't just mentioned issues with the property. He'd called Morrison's assistant, introduced himself as my son and business partner, and provided a detailed list of safety concerns. Steep stairs that were dangerous for older guests, a hot tub with faulty temperature controls, internet that was unreliable for business use, even claimed the recent rains had caused potential structural issues that made the property unsuitable for their distinguished clientele. Every word was a lie. Every claim was designed to sound reasonable while being completely false. But the Morrisons weren't just canceling. They were considering legal action for misrepresentation, since my listing didn't mention any of these supposed problems. Patricia's voice grew tighter with each detail she shared. Mrs. Williams, I have, to be honest, this kind of situation, it reflects poorly on our entire platform. I'm going to need documentation from you proving these claims are false, or we may have to suspend your listing pending investigation. My 40-year career managing properties, my spotless record, my 5-star rating, all of it now in jeopardy because my son wanted a family discount. After hanging up, I walked through my house, really looking at it for the first time in months. The craftsman-style home James and I had bought in 1982 was worth over $2 million now, sitting on 3 acres in one of Carmel's most desirable neighborhoods. The art on my walls, pieces we'd collected during our travels, represented another $1 million easily. The wine cellar James had spent 20 years curating. I'd been living like a woman dependent on rental income when I was actually quite wealthy. But I'd kept working because I loved it, because it gave me purpose, because James had always said that financial independence was the greatest gift you could give yourself. Now my own family was systematically destroying that independence. I needed to understand how this had started. I called Emma first. My 23-year-old granddaughter answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. Grandma Maggie, perfect timing. I was just thinking about you. Were you, sweetheart? Dad told me about the New Year's plan. I'm so excited. It's been forever since we all got together at the villa. Emma, can you tell me exactly what your father said about this plan? A pause. Just that you'd offered to let us use the villa for New Year's since business was slow anyway. Business was slow anyway. Did he mention that I had to cancel a paid booking? Cancel a... What? No, he said you were having trouble finding renters for the holidays because it's too expensive for most families. My chest tightened. David had lied to his own daughter. Made it sound like he was doing me a favor by agreeing to rent the property. Emma, honey, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Has your father ever suggested that I'm having difficulties, financially or otherwise? Another pause, longer this time. Grandma, are you okay? You sound upset. I'm fine. I just need to understand something. Well, Emma's voice became careful. He has mentioned that he's worried about you. The big house, managing the rental property by yourself, dealing with all that business stuff at your age. He says you're too proud to ask for help. Too proud to ask for help. I set down my coffee cup with enough force to rattle the saucer. Has he suggested any specific ways to help me? He thinks you should sell the villa, move somewhere smaller, more manageable. Maybe one of those nice senior communities where you wouldn't have to worry about maintenance and stuff. A senior community, where I wouldn't have to worry about maintenance and stuff or have any independence, property, or income of my own. And what do you think about that suggestion? Honestly, I think you're the strongest person I know, and if you wanted help, you'd ask for it, but… She hesitated. Dad can be pretty convincing when he thinks he knows what's best for people. Yes, he could. I'd spent 45 years being convinced. After we hung up, I sat in my garden and tried to remember when this had started. When had David begun positioning himself as my caretaker rather than my son? When had my capable management of my own affairs become something that worried him? The answer came to me as I watched a hummingbird defend its territory from a much larger jay. It had started the day after James's funeral, when David had pulled me aside and said, "Don't worry about anything, Mom. I'll take care of all the business stuff now." I'd told him I was perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, but David had this way of nodding and agreeing while completely ignoring what you'd actually said. Within a month, he was calling my financial advisor, my accountant, my property manager. "Just checking in on Mom," he'd say, making sure everything's running smoothly. I'd thought he was being caring. Now I realized he'd been gathering intelligence. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, David's wife. "So excited for New Year's, already planning the menu. Hope you don't mind. I took the liberty of canceling your usual cleaning service for that week since we'll be there. Anyway, save you some money." She'd canceled my cleaning service without asking me. I stared at that text for a full minute, feeling something shift inside my chest. It wasn't anger exactly, it was clarity. I walked to my home office and pulled out the file I kept on the villa's finances. Gross income last year, $340,000. Operating expenses, $85,000. Net profit, $255,000. Not counting the property's appreciation, which had increased its value by nearly $200,000 in the past 3 years. This wasn't a hobby. This wasn't something I did to keep busy. This was a significant business, and I was good at it. I opened my laptop and did something I hadn't done in months. I looked at my total net worth. The house, the villa, my investment accounts, James's life insurance, the art collection, the wine. The number on the screen was substantial enough to make me laugh out loud. I was not a woman who needed to be taken care of. I was a woman who had been very successfully taking care of herself, and it was time my family remembered that. I picked up the phone and dialed David's number. This time, I wasn't calling as the accommodating mother who always said yes. I was calling as Margaret Chen Williams, businesswoman and property owner, and I had some new terms to discuss. David answered on the first ring, his voice warm and expectant. "Mom, I was hoping you'd call back. Jessica's already started planning the menu for New Year's. She's thinking of doing that salmon thing you love and…" "David." I cut him off, my voice steady and cold. "We need to talk, now." The warmth in his voice flickered. "Of course. Is everything okay? You sound different." "I'm coming over." "What? Now?" "Mom, it's the middle of the afternoon. Jessica's at her Pilates class, and I have a conference call at 3. Cancel it." I hung up before he could respond and grabbed my keys. The drive to David and Jessica's house in Pebble Beach usually calmed me, the winding roads through Monterey Pines, glimpses of the ocean between branches. Today, I barely noticed the scenery. My mind was occupied with numbers, dates, and a growing understanding of how systematically I'd been undermined. David lived in a sprawling contemporary home worth at least $4 million. Solar panels, smart home technology, a 3-car garage housing his Tesla, Jessica's Range Rover, and a vintage Porsche he'd bought himself for his 50th birthday. Not the lifestyle of a man who needed to save money by convincing his mother to give him a $60,000 family discount. I parked in their circular driveway, noting the new landscaping, Japanese maples that must have cost thousands, a water feature that probably cost more than most people's cars. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see David pacing in his home office, phone pressed to his ear. He was still talking when I rang the doorbell. "Mom?" He opened the door with the phone still against his ear, holding up one finger in a gesture that meant, "Wait. Sorry, Steve. I'm going to have to call you back. Family emergency." If only he knew. "Come in." He ushered me into their living room, all white furniture and abstract art. "Can I get you some tea? Water? You look a little pale." I remained standing. I spoke with Patricia at the rental company and with the Morrisons. David's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The practiced smile became a little more fixed. "Oh, good. I hope that cleared everything up." It did, actually. It cleared up quite a lot. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app where I'd transcribed my conversation with Patricia. "Would you like to hear exactly what you told Morrison's assistant? Because I have it word for word." "Mom, look, maybe there was some miscommunication. Steep stairs dangerous for older guests, hot tub with faulty temperature controls, unreliable internet, potential structural issues from recent rains." I looked up from my phone. "Should I continue?" David sat heavily on his white leather sofa, running his hands through his salt and pepper hair. For the first time in years, he looked actually uncomfortable around me. Maybe I was a little more detailed than necessary. Detailed? "David, you lied about every single aspect of the property. Those stairs have safety rails. The hot tub was specifically designed for accessibility. You've used the internet there dozens of times for work. I was trying to help them make an informed decision. You were trying to manipulate them into canceling so you could get the property for a third of what they were paying." David stood and walked to his windows, looking out at his manicured lawn. "Mom, I think you're blowing this out of proportion." "Am I? Let me ask you something else. When did you start telling people I was having financial difficulties?" His shoulders tensed. "I never said that. Emma told me you've been worried about me managing. The big house, the rental property, all that business stuff at my age. You suggested I should sell the villa and move to a senior community. I never said financial difficulties. I said I was concerned about the stress. The stress of running a successful business that nets me over $250,000 a year." The number hung in the air between us. David turned around slowly, his expression carefully blank. $250,000? "Mom, that can't be right." "It's exactly right. Which you'd know if you'd ever asked about my actual finances instead of making assumptions." David walked to his home bar, another recent addition, and poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey. It was barely past noon. "Look, I may have misunderstood the scope of your business operations." "Misunderstood? Is that what we're calling it?" He took a sip of whiskey and set the glass down with the careful precision of someone trying to maintain control. "Mom, I'm your son. I want what's best for you. If I got wrong..." "Details?" "David, you sabotaged a $90,000 booking. You've spent months positioning yourself as my caretaker to my granddaughter. Jessica canceled my cleaning service without asking me. How long has this been going on?" "How long has what been going on?" "This campaign to convince everyone, including me, that I need to be managed." David picked up his whiskey again, drained it, and looked at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Something calculating. "Mom, you're 72 years old. I'm aware of my age. Living alone in a house that's way too big for you, running around playing real estate mogul, pretending you're still 35. Pretending? The word came out sharper than I intended. Yes, pretending. It's time to be realistic about your limitations. Dad's been gone 5 years. You're not getting any younger. What happens when you can't climb those stairs at the villa anymore? What happens when you fall and break a hip and there's no one there to help you? I studied my son's face. This man I'd raised, this person I'd sacrificed for countless times. The boy who'd called me crying from college when his girlfriend broke up with him. The young man who'd moved back home for 6 months after his first job layoff. The father who'd asked me to co-sign his first mortgage because his credit wasn't quite good enough. When had that person become this stranger who saw my independence as a problem to be solved? David, let me ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. He set down his empty glass. If something happened to me tomorrow, if I died or became incapacitated, what would happen to my assets? What kind of question is that? A direct one. Answer it. David shifted uncomfortably. Well, according to your will, everything would go to me and Emma. But Mom, why are you talking about... And who would make decisions about selling the properties, managing the investments, distributing the assets? I would, as executor, but... So, in the event of my death or incapacity, you would inherit approximately $6 million in assets and have complete control over how they're managed and distributed. The number seemed to hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale. 6 million? Mom, that's not... I mean, I knew you were comfortable, but... You had no idea, did you? You've been working so hard to convince everyone I need help managing my affairs, but you never actually looked at what those affairs entailed. David sank back onto his sofa, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. Jesus, Mom, 6 million. Now let me ask you another question. If I'm competently managing $6 million in assets, if I'm successfully running a business that generates substantial income, if I'm living independently and happily in my own home, what exactly am I supposed to need help with? The silence stretched between us. Outside, I could hear a lawn, mower starting up, the normal sounds of a Tuesday afternoon in an affluent neighborhood. Inside, something fundamental had shifted in the relationship between my son and me. I never meant... David started, then stopped. I was genuinely worried about you. Or were you worried about what might happen to your inheritance if I continue to be so inconveniently capable? That's not fair, isn't it? You've spent months undermining my reputation as a competent businesswoman. You've lied to my clients. You've manipulated my granddaughter into thinking I need caretaking. You've had your wife cancel my services without my permission. And now you want me to give you a $60,000 discount on a property rental so you can have a family vacation. David's face had gone from pale to red. Everything I've done has been out of love and concern for your well-being. Has it? Then why didn't you ever ask me about my well-being? Why didn't you ask about my finances, my health, my happiness? Why did you just assume I was failing and needed you to take over? He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. I'll tell you why, I continued. Because asking would have meant treating me as an equal, as a competent adult. And somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as your future inheritance. That's not true. Then prove it. I stood and walked toward the door. I'm going home now. I'm going to call the Morrisons and do whatever it takes to repair the damage you've caused to my business. Then I'm going to decide what to do about New Year's. Mom, wait, please. Let's talk about this rationally. I turned back to look at him, this man I'd raised to be honest and kind, who'd grown into someone willing to lie to his own daughter and sabotage his mother's livelihood for a vacation discount. David, for the first time in months, I'm thinking completely rationally. That's exactly the problem. The drive home felt different. The same winding roads, the same Monterey pines, but now I was seeing everything through clearer eyes. I wasn't the fragile widow my family had been treating me as. I was Margaret Chen Williams, and I had work to do. My first call was to Patricia at Coastal Elite Rentals. I explained the situation with clinical precision. My son's interference, the false information provided to the Morrisons, my commitment to resolving the situation completely. Patricia's relief was audible. Mrs. Williams, I have to say, this explains a lot. The concerns the Morrisons raised didn't match anything in our system about your property. Your ratings have been flawless for years. I'd like to speak with the Morrisons directly if possible. I want to offer them a personal apology and see if we can resolve this. I'll reach out to them immediately and set up a call. While I waited, I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my personal safe. James had installed it behind our bedroom wall. In 1995, hidden behind a reproduction of a Monet painting. Inside were our important documents, some emergency cash, and a manila folder I hadn't touched since the day after his funeral. The folder contained information I'd hoped never to use. Insurance policies, financial records, and copies of legal documents that painted a very different picture of my marriage than the one my children knew. James hadn't just been a loving husband and successful architect. He'd also been preparing for possibilities we'd never discussed openly. But that wasn't what I needed now. What I needed was in a separate envelope, sealed and dated 3 months ago. Inside were photocopies of documents I'd discovered while organizing James's papers. Documents that revealed my son's financial situation wasn't quite as secure as his lifestyle suggested. I'd stumbled across them accidentally while helping David with some tax paperwork. A second mortgage on his house, significant credit card debt, a loan against his 401k that he'd never mentioned. Nothing criminal, nothing that made him a bad person, but enough to explain why a $60,000 windfall might feel necessary rather than simply convenient. At the time, I'd made copies and put them away, thinking I might find a way to help him without damaging his pride. Now I wondered if his pride was the least of my concerns. My phone rang. Patricia had managed to arrange a conference call with the Morrisons for 4 o'clock. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, I began when we were connected, I want to personally apologize for the confusion regarding my property. I've investigated the claims made about safety issues, and I can assure you they were completely false. Mrs. Williams, Mr. Morrison's voice was crisp but not unkind. We appreciate you calling. But frankly, this kind of last-minute chaos isn't what we expect when we're paying this level of premium for a vacation rental. I understand completely, and I take full responsibility for allowing this to happen. The person who contacted you was my son, and he was acting without my knowledge or authorization. A pause. Your son? Yes. He was attempting to manipulate you into canceling so that he could rent the property for his own family at a significant discount. Mrs. Morrison's sharp intake of breath was audible. He sabotaged our reservation for a family discount? I'm afraid so. And I want to make this right. I'd like to offer you the villa for New Year's week at 20% below our agreed rate, plus a complimentary wine tasting experience and chef service for 1 evening. Mrs. Williams, Mr. Morrison said slowly, that's quite generous, but we've already made alternative arrangements. My heart sank, but I pressed on. I understand, but I'd like to extend the same offer for any future dates you might be interested in. And I want you to know that the person responsible for this situation will have no further access to information about my business. After we hung up, I sat in my office surrounded by the evidence of my son's deception and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The cold, calculating anger that had once made me successful in business. James used to say I had 2 modes, warm mother and steel businesswoman. For the past 5 years, I'd been operating almost exclusively in the first mode. It was time to remember the second. I called my lawyer, Richard Castellanos, who'd been handling my affairs since 1998. Margaret, how are you holding up? I was just thinking about you the other day. Richard, I need to see you tomorrow morning. First thing, it's urgent. Of course. Is everything all right? I'm not sure yet, but I need to review my will, my power of attorney documents, and I want to discuss some changes to how my assets are structured. Changes? Margaret, has something happened? Something's been happening for months. I'm just now seeing it clearly. After scheduling the appointment, I walked through my house again, this time not just seeing it, but really cataloging it. The art collection wasn't just beautiful, it was valuable. James had been methodical about purchasing pieces from emerging artists who later became established. That small sculpture in the hallway? Worth $40,000 now. The photography series in the dining room? $60,000 minimum. I'd been living surrounded by wealth while being treated like I needed financial assistance. My phone buzzed with a, "David told me about your conversation today. I think there may have been some misunderstandings. Can we all sit down tomorrow and work this out like adults? Family is more important than business." I stared at that text for a long moment, feeling the condescension dripping from every exclamation point and heart emoji, as if my business was some cute hobby that shouldn't interfere with family harmony. I was still staring at the text when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Emma standing on my porch, shifting her weight from foot to foot the way she'd done as a child when she was nervous. "Grandma," she called out, "I know you're home. Dad called me." I opened the door to find my granddaughter looking genuinely distressed, her usually perfect makeup smudged as if she'd been crying. "Emma, sweetheart, come in." She threw her arms around me immediately, something she hadn't done since she was 15. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what Dad had done. When he told me tonight, I couldn't believe it." I led her to the kitchen and put the kettle on for tea. "What exactly did he tell you?" "Everything. About lying to your clients, about the money, about trying to get you to sell the villa. He's freaking out because he says you hate him now." "I don't hate your father, Emma, but I am disappointed in his choices." Emma sat at my kitchen island, the same spot where she'd done homework as a child when she stayed with me after school. "He says he was trying to protect you." "From what?" I don't know, from stress? From working too hard?" She looked up at me with James's eyes, confused and seeking guidance. "Grandma, are you really worth $6 million? The question was so blunt, so innocent, that I almost laughed. "Yes, Emma, I am." "Holy shit." She clapped her hand over her mouth. "Sorry, I mean, holy cow, that's a lot of money." "It is." "So why do you still work? Why not just retire and travel and do grandma things?" I sat across from her, studying this young woman who carried my hopes for the future. "What do you think grandma things are?" "I don't know. Gardening, book clubs, knitting." "I see. And what if I told you that running my business, managing properties, working with clients, what if I told you those things make me happy? What if retirement sounds boring to me?" Emma looked genuinely puzzled. "But you're 72. And?" "Well, I mean, aren't you supposed to slow down at some point?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "Emma, let me ask you something. You're 23. You have your whole life ahead of you. What do you want to do with it?" "I want to be a documentary filmmaker. I want to travel and tell important stories and maybe change the world a little bit." "And when should you stop doing that?" "Never, I hope." "Then why should I stop doing what I love just because I've been doing it longer?" She was quiet for a moment, processing this. "I never thought about it that way. Your father sees my age as a limitation. I see it as experience. I've been managing properties and dealing with difficult clients and solving complex problems for 40 years. I'm better at it now than I've ever been." "But what about when you get really old, like 80 or 90? "Emma, when I'm 80, if I'm lucky enough to reach 80, I'll evaluate my capabilities then. I won't let someone else make that decision for me when I'm 72 and perfectly competent." She nodded slowly. "Dad really screwed up, didn't he?" "Yes, he did." "What are you going to do?" I looked at this young woman, this bright, passionate person who represented the best of our family's future, and made a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to teach him, and the rest of the family, that underestimating Margaret Chen Williams is a very expensive mistake." Emma's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" I smiled for the first time all day. "It means, sweetheart, that this family is about to learn who I really am." I arrived at Richard Castellanos' law office at 8:30 the next morning, carrying a manila folder thick with documents and a level of determination I hadn't felt in years. Richard's office overlooked Carmel's courthouse square, and through his windows I could see the early morning fog beginning to lift from the cypress trees. "Margaret, you look—" Richard paused, studying my face. "You look different, sharper somehow." "I feel different." I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, the same chair I'd sat in to review James's will, to handle the estate planning, to sign documents that had shaped my life for decades. "Richard, I need to make some significant changes, and I need them implemented immediately." He pulled out a legal pad and adjusted his reading glasses. "Tell me what's happened." I laid out the entire situation: David's lies, the sabotaged booking, the pattern of manipulation that I now realized had been going on for months. Richard's expression grew increasingly grave as I spoke. "Margaret, what you're describing sounds like financial elder abuse. Is that a legal term?" "It is, and it's a serious crime in California. When an adult child systematically undermines a parent's business relationships, interferes with their income, or manipulates them toward dependence for financial gain, that meets the definition." I felt a chill run through me. "I don't want to press criminal charges against my son. I'm not suggesting you should, but I want you to understand that what's happened to you isn't just family drama. It's a pattern of behavior that courts take very seriously." Richard leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against his legal pad. "What exactly do you want to do?" "First, I want David removed as executor of my will, immediately. That's straightforward. Who would you like to designate instead, if you're willing?" "With Emma, as backup executor." "Of course. What else?" "I want to revoke the financial power of attorney I gave David last year." Richard's eyebrows rose. "You gave David financial power of attorney?" "He convinced me it was a smart precaution, in case something happened to me." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. "He said it would make things easier for the family." "Margaret, financial power of attorney gives someone the legal right to make decisions about your money, your property, your business. Did you understand that?" "I thought it was just for emergencies." "It's not. Once signed, it can be activated whenever the designated person claims you're incapacitated, and proving you're not incapacitated can be surprisingly difficult." The room seemed to spin slightly. "Are you saying David could have—" "I'm saying he could have sold your properties, closed your business accounts, moved you to a care facility, and claimed he was acting in your best interests. The power of attorney document would have given him legal cover to do all of it." I gripped the arms of my chair. "Jesus, do you have any reason to believe he's accessed your accounts or used the power of attorney?" "I don't know. How would I know?" Richard was already reaching for his phone. "We're going to find out. I'm calling my investigator. We need a complete audit of your financial accounts going back 18 months. While Richard made his calls, I walked to his window and looked out at the courthouse where James and I had been married 46 years ago. We'd chosen the civil ceremony partly for efficiency, and partly because neither of us wanted the drama of a big family wedding. James had joked that we were too practical for romance, but we'd built a life on that practicality. Every financial decision carefully considered, every investment researched, every asset acquired with thought and planning. James had left me not just wealthy, but educated about wealth. He'd insisted I understand every aspect of our finances, every investment, every legal protection. So how had I been so naive about my own son? "Margaret?" Richard had finished his calls. "Tom Rodriguez is meeting us here in an hour. He's the best forensic accountant I know. In the meantime, I want you to call your banks and request a complete review of anyone who's accessed your accounts in the past year." "Including David?" "Especially David." The next hour was a blur of phone calls and growing dread. My primary bank confirmed that. David had accessed my checking account 3 times in the past 6 months, using the power of attorney to request account statements and balance information. My investment firm reported similar inquiries. He'd even contacted my insurance company to ask about my life insurance policies. Tom Rodriguez arrived at 10 o'clock sharp, a compact, intense man with silver hair and the kind of focused energy that made me instantly trust him. He spread his laptop and documents across Richard's conference table and got straight to business. Mrs. Williams, I've done a preliminary review of your accounts based on what Richard sent me. The good news is, I don't see any unauthorized withdrawals or transfers. The concerning news is that someone has been conducting what I'd call reconnaissance. Reconnaissance? Tom pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop. Look at this pattern. July 15th, your son requests account balances from your primary bank. July 20th, he contacts your investment advisor asking about your mother's portfolio performance and any concerns about her decision-making capacity. August 3rd, he calls your property management company asking about your cognitive state and whether you've been acting confused about business decisions. The words hit me like physical blows. He was building a case. It appears so. In elder financial abuse cases, we often see this pattern. The perpetrator establishes a narrative of declining capacity, gathers evidence to support that narrative, then uses it to justify taking control. Richard leaned forward. Tom, what would have been the next step in this pattern? Typically, a doctor's visit where the son expresses concern about the parent's mental state, maybe suggests some cognitive testing. If the doctor expresses any concern, and they often do because they're being presented with a worried family member, that becomes medical documentation of possible incapacity. I felt sick. David has been asking me to see a doctor for a general checkup. When? He brings it up every few weeks, says I should have a complete physical, get a baseline on my cognitive function, make sure I'm staying sharp. Tom and Richard exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. Margaret, Richard said gently, I think you should know that David contacted my office 2 weeks ago. What? He called asking about your estate planning, said he was concerned about some of your recent decisions. He asked if I thought you might benefit from a competency evaluation. The room went completely silent, except for the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. He was going to have me declared incompetent. It's possible, Richard said. Tom, how often do these cases progress that far? More often than you'd think. Adult children who convince a doctor their parent is showing signs of dementia can often get conservatorship fairly easily, especially if the parent has significant assets that need protection. I stood up, abruptly, and walked back to the window, trying to process what I'd just learned. My son hadn't just been undermining my business for a family discount. He'd been systematically building a case to take control of my entire life. Mrs. Williams? Tom's voice was gentle. Are you all right? I turned back to face them. I want to know everything. Every call he made, every person he contacted, every lie he told. I want documentation of all of it. That's going to take some time. I have time. And I have money to pay for the best investigation you can do. I sat back down and looked directly at both men. Richard, I want you to draft new estate planning documents. Remove David as beneficiary of everything except a nominal inheritance. Set up trusts for Emma's education and future. Designate specific charities for the remainder. Margaret, that's a significant change. Are you sure? I'm completely sure. And I want it done before New Year's Eve. Why New Year's Eve specifically? I smiled, feeling that cold calculation settle back into my chest where it belonged. Because that's when I'm going to tell my family exactly what their behavior has cost them. Tom closed his laptop. Mrs. Williams, what you're describing, it sounds like you're planning some kind of confrontation. I'm planning to reclaim my life and my dignity. If that requires a confrontation, so be it. Richard was taking notes rapidly. What about the villa rental situation? I'm handling that separately. The Morrisons have decided to book with me again in the spring, with the discount I offered. My reputation will recover. As for New Year's Eve? I paused, thinking about David's expectation of a family gathering, Jessica's menu planning, Emma's excitement. Richard, can you have all the new documents ready by December 30th? If I work over the holiday, yes. Do it. I want everything signed and sealed before my family arrives for what they think will be a celebration. I gathered my papers and stood to leave. Tom, how long for the complete investigation? 2 weeks for the preliminary report. A month for everything. Perfect. Richard, I'll need one more thing. What's that? I want you to prepare a letter detailing everything David has done, every law he may have broken, every ethical line he's crossed. I want it ready to send to the California Bar Association. Margaret, David isn't a lawyer. No, but he's a licensed real estate broker. And what he did to my business clients could cost him his license. Both men stared at me. I told Emma yesterday that underestimating me was an expensive mistake, I continued. I want my son to understand exactly how expensive it's going to be. The days between my meeting with Richard and New Year's Eve passed in a strange blur of normal activities and revolutionary planning. I tended my orchids, managed my rental bookings, and hosted my regular book club meeting, all while systematically dismantling 45 years of family assumptions about who Margaret Chen Williams really was. Tom Rodriguez's preliminary report arrived on December 28th, and it was worse than I'd imagined. David hadn't just made a few phone calls. He'd conducted what could only be described as a campaign. My financial advisor, my accountant, my insurance agent, 3 different doctor's offices, my property manager, my cleaning service, even the florist I used for the villa. David had contacted all of them, expressing concern about my cognitive state, my decision-making capacity, my ability to live independently. The pattern was sophisticated and deliberate. Never anything that could be construed as obviously malicious. Always the worried son, just checking in, just making sure Mom was okay. But the cumulative effect was clear. He'd been building a comprehensive case that I was declining and needed intervention. Most disturbing was a conversation he'd had with Dr. Peterson, my longtime physician. David had, told him I'd been confused about finances and making impulsive decisions about large sums of money. He'd suggested that my next appointment include cognitive screening. Dr. Peterson, who'd known me for 15 years, had noted David's concerns in my file, but hadn't acted on them. When Tom called to verify the information, Dr. Peterson was appalled. Mrs. Williams is one of the sharpest patients I have, he'd told Tom. If anything, she's more organized and decisive than people half her age. I should have questioned why her son was painting such a different picture. I spent December 29th at Richard's office, signing new documents that reflected my true wishes rather than my old assumptions about family loyalty. Emma would inherit the house and a significant trust fund for her education and future projects. Several charities James and I had supported would receive substantial bequests. David would receive $50,000, enough to acknowledge he was my son, not enough to reward his betrayal. "Are you certain about this, Margaret?" Richard asked as I signed the final page. "This is a dramatic change. I've never been more certain of anything in my life." That evening, I called Emma to confirm she was still planning to come for New Year's Eve. "Of course, Grandma, I wouldn't miss it. Though," she hesitated, "Dad's been really weird the past few days. He keeps asking if I've talked to you, if you seem like yourself, stuff like that." "And what do you tell him?" "That you seem exactly like yourself, just less willing to put up with his crap." I laughed, despite the gravity of the situation. "That's very perceptive. Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Always. Are you really going to cut Dad out of your will?" I was quiet for a moment, surprised by her directness. "What makes you think I would do that?" "Because if someone had tried to do to me what he did to you, I'd probably do a lot worse than cut them out of my will." "Emma, what your father did was serious. It wasn't just lying about a rental property. He was systematically undermining my reputation and independence. If he'd succeeded, you'd be in some old folks' home while he managed your money." "Exactly. So yeah, I get it. I guess I'm sad that it came to this." "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." On December 30th, I received an unexpected call from Jessica. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I know things have been tense since that misunderstanding about the villa." Misunderstanding. I marveled at her ability to reframe David's deliberate sabotage as a simple miscommunication. "What can I do for you, Jessica? I was hoping we could clear the air before tomorrow. David's been so stressed about this whole situation. He really feels terrible about how things got blown out of proportion. I'm sure he does. The thing is, Margaret, I think you may have gotten the wrong impression about David's motivations. He truly was just trying to help." I walked to my window, looking out at the garden James and I had planted together. Jessica, help me understand something. When David called my clients and lied about safety issues at the villa, was that helping? Well, I think he may have been overly cautious. When he contacted my doctor suggesting I needed cognitive testing, was that helping? A pause. I don't know what you mean. When he called my financial advisor asking about my decision-making capacity, was that helping? The silence stretched longer this time. Jessica, are you still there? Margaret, I think there may be some confusion. There's no confusion. I have documentation of every call David made, every lie he told, every person he contacted in his campaign to have me declared incompetent. The only question is whether you knew about it. Another long pause. Margaret, I think you're being paranoid. Am I? Then you won't mind if I share the forensic accountant's report with you tomorrow. You can see for yourself exactly what your husband was planning. A forensic accountant? Margaret, that's extreme, don't you think? What's extreme is systematically undermining your elderly mother-in-law's business and independence so you can gain control of her assets. What I'm doing is called protecting myself. I hung up before she could respond. That evening, I prepared the villa for what would either be a reconciliation or a reckoning. I arranged the documents on the dining room. Tom had found transcripts of David's phone calls, the timeline of his campaign against me. I also prepared copies of my new will and estate planning documents. Everything was ready for my family to learn who I really was. But first, I had one more call to make. Mr. Morrison, this is Margaret Williams. I hope you don't mind me calling so late. Mrs. Williams, not at all. How are you? I'm well, thank you. I wanted to let you know that the situation with my son has been resolved. Permanently. I see. I also wanted to ask if you'd be willing to do something for me. Tomorrow evening, I'm hosting a family gathering. It's possible that my son might contact you afterward, claiming that I'm not competent to manage my own affairs. After what he pulled with our reservation, I'd be surprised if he had the nerve. You'd be surprised what people will do when they're desperate. If he contacts you, I'd appreciate it if you'd refer him to my attorney, Richard Castellanos. I'll give you his number. Of course. Mrs. Williams, is everything all right? I looked around my beautiful home, filled with 40 years of memories and carefully chosen possessions, knowing that in 12 hours my family would gather here, expecting to find a confused old woman ready to be managed. Instead, they were going to meet Margaret Chen Williams, businesswoman and property owner, who had spent the past week reclaiming her power and preparing to teach them exactly what their betrayal had cost. Everything's perfect, Mr. Morrison. For the first time in months, everything's exactly as it should be. After I hung up, I walked through my house one more time, touching the surfaces James and I had chosen together, remembering the couple who'd built this life through careful planning and mutual respect. Tomorrow, I would honor that legacy by refusing to let our son destroy it. I went to bed early, setting my alarm for 7 a.m. I had a party to prepare for. A new Year's Eve gathering that would indeed mark the end of something old and the beginning of something entirely new. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the woman I'd been a week ago. Accommodating, trusting, willing to believe the best of everyone. She'd served me well for 72 years. But it was time to meet the woman I was becoming. New Year's Eve dawned crisp and clear, the kind of California winter morning that makes you understand why people pay millions to live here. I rose early, made coffee, and spent an hour in my garden, touching the plants James and I had nurtured over the decades. The orchids were thriving, their delicate blooms proof that with proper care and attention, beautiful things could flourish for years. By 10 a.m., I was ready. I'd arranged the dining room like a boardroom. The mahogany table that had hosted countless family dinners now held neat stacks of documents, each pile representing a different aspect of David's campaign against me. Tom Rodriguez's forensic report, transcripts of phone calls, copies of my new estate planning documents, everything organized with the precision James had always admired in my business presentations. David and Jessica arrived first at 2 o'clock sharp. I watched through the window as David sat in his Tesla for several minutes before getting out, clearly steeling himself for whatever conversation he thought we were going to have. "Mom!" Jessica's voice was overly bright as I opened the door. "Happy New Year's Eve! You look wonderful!" David kissed my cheek, his smile tense. "Hey, Mom. Thanks for having us." "Of course. Come in." I led them to the living room, not the dining room. "Not yet. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Wine?" "Wine sounds perfect," Jessica said, settling onto the sofa with the careful grace she'd cultivated during her years as a country club wife. "I brought that bottle of champagne you love for tonight." "How thoughtful." David was pacing, unable to sit still. "Mom, before everyone else gets here, maybe we should talk about, clear the air. We'll have plenty of time to talk once Emma and Michael arrive. I just want you to know that I've been thinking about everything, and I realize I may have handled it badly." I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into James's chair. "In what way do you think you handled it badly, David?" "Well, I probably should have talked to you first before contacting the Morrisons. That was presumptuous." "Presumptuous? Not dishonest? Not fraudulent? Presumptuous. I see. And what about the other contacts you made?" David's pacing stopped. "Other contacts?" "David, please sit down. You're making me nervous." He perched on the edge of the sofa next to Jessica, who was studying my face with growing unease. "What other contacts?" Jessica asked. I sipped my wine, noting how the afternoon light caught the crystal. James had chosen these glasses during our trip to Ireland in 1995. Everything in this house had a story, a history, a significance that my family had never bothered to learn. "We'll discuss everything once Emma gets here. I prefer to have these conversations only once." The next hour passed in stilted small talk. Jessica complimented my Christmas decorations. David asked about my New Year's resolutions. I answered politely while watching the clock and marveling at how strange it felt to sit in my own living room making conversation with people who had systematically betrayed me. Emma and Michael arrived at 3:30, bringing energy and genuine warmth that highlighted the tension everyone else was carrying. "Grandma!" hugged me tightly. "This house smells like cinnamon and pine trees, just like always." "Hello, sweetheart." "Michael, thank you for coming." Michael, Emma's boyfriend of 6 months, was a documentary filmmaker like Emma, thoughtful, observant, clearly uncomfortable with whatever family drama he'd walked into. "Should I?" Michael glanced around uncertainly. "You should stay," I said firmly. "You're part of this family now, and families should understand each other completely." David and Jessica exchanged glances. "Mom," David said carefully, "if this is about family business, maybe—" "It is about family business. Our business. All of it." I stood up. "Let's move to the dining room." The moment they saw the documents arranged on the table, the atmosphere changed completely. David went pale. Jessica's carefully maintained composure cracked. Emma looked confused but alert. "Please, everyone sit down." I remained standing at the head of the table, feeling more like myself than I had in months. 3 weeks ago, David called the Morrisons and lied about my property to force them to cancel a $90,000 booking. I thought that was the extent of his interference in my business. I picked up the first stack of documents. I was wrong. "Mom," David started. "I'm talking." My voice carried the authority I'd used in board meetings 40 years ago, and David fell silent immediately. For the past 6 months, David has conducted a systematic campaign to undermine my competence, my independence, and my business reputation. I opened Tom's report and began reading. July 15th. David contacts my bank requesting account balances, citing concerns about my financial decision-making. July 20th. He calls my investment advisor asking about my cognitive state and whether I've been acting confused. David was gripping the edge of the table. "I was worried about you." August 3rd. David contacts my property management company asking if I've seemed mentally sharp during business meetings. August 10th. He calls Dr. Peterson suggesting I need cognitive testing because I've been making impulsive decisions about large sums of money. Emma's face was a study in growing horror. "Dad, what the hell?" "Let me finish," I continued, turning pages. September through. November. Calls to my accountant, my insurance agent, my cleaning service, my florist. Always the same story. Margaret seems confused. Margaret might need help. Has Margaret been acting like herself? I set down the report and looked directly at my son. David, this wasn't concern. This was reconnaissance. You were building a case to have me declared incompetent so you could take control of my assets. That's not true, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Richard Castellanos tells me you called his office asking about competency evaluations. Jessica spoke for the first time since sitting down. David, you said you were just checking on estate planning issues. I was protecting the family's interests. You were protecting your inheritance, I said quietly. But here's what you didn't know while you were conducting your investigation. I was conducting one of my own. I pulled out the financial summary Tom had prepared. David, your house has a second mortgage. You have $87,000 in credit card debt. You've borrowed against your 401k twice in the past year. David's face went from pale to gray. You weren't worried about my competence, David. You were worried about your cash flow. A $90,000 villa rental seemed like found money. My estate seemed like your retirement plan. Mom, it's exactly fair. I pulled out copies of my new will, which is why I've made some changes. I distributed copies to everyone, except David. Emma, you'll inherit the house and a trust fund for your education and career. Several charities will receive the remainder of my assets. David, you'll receive $50,000. The silence was absolute. 50,000? Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. It's more than generous, considering what you attempted to do. David found his voice. Mom, you can't be serious. I'm your son. Yes, you are. And as my son, you should have supported my independence, not I. Systematically undermined it. You should have celebrated my success, not tried to destroy it for your own benefit. Emma was staring at her father with something approaching disgust. Dad, how could you do this? I was trying to help. You were trying to help yourself, Emma snapped. God, Dad, she's not some confused old lady. She's Grandma Maggie. She runs a business. She manages millions of dollars. She's smarter than both of us put together. I felt a surge of love for my granddaughter that almost brought tears to my eyes. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out the final document. David, this is a letter detailing every lie you told, every client you contacted, every law you may have broken. It's ready to be sent to the California Real Estate Commission. You would destroy my career? David's voice was hollow. I would protect myself and other vulnerable people from someone who's willing to commit fraud for financial gain. Mom, please. For the first time, David sounded genuinely desperate. I know I screwed up. I know I went too far. But I was scared of what? Of losing you. Of watching you decline and not being able to help. Of making the wrong decisions when you... He stopped. What, David? When you die. The words came out in a whisper. I was terrified of being responsible for everything and not knowing what you would have wanted. I felt something shift in my chest, a small crack in the wall of anger I'd built over the past. So instead of talking to me about your fears, you decided to take control while I was still alive. I thought I was protecting you. From what? From making mistakes, from being taken advantage of, from proving that Dad was wrong about you. The room went quiet. Even Emma stopped breathing. What do you mean, wrong about me? David looked down at his hands. Dad always said you were the strongest person he knew, that you could handle anything. After he died, I kept waiting for you to fall apart, to need help, to prove that you were human like the rest of us. I sat down slowly, finally understanding the root of everything that had happened. And when I didn't fall apart, I thought you were pretending. I thought you were in denial about your limitations. I thought... He looked up at me with James's eyes, but filled with a pain I'd never seen before. I thought if I didn't take care of you, no one would. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 5 o'clock. Outside, the winter afternoon was fading into evening. David, look at me. He met my eyes reluctantly. I am not your responsibility. I am your mother. There's a difference. But when you need help, I'll ask for it. And until then, you'll respect my independence the way your father did. I looked around the table at my family. Damaged but not broken. Misguided but not malicious. The will stands, I said finally. The letter to the Real Estate Commission will remain unsigned unless you give me reason to send it. And David? Yes? You're going to call every person you contacted about my supposed incompetence. You're going to apologize and correct the record. You're going to explain that you were mistaken, that I am completely competent, and that they should disregard everything you told them. David nodded slowly. And then, I continued, we're going to have dinner and celebrate the new year. Because despite everything that's happened, we're still family. As the evening progressed, something remarkable happened. With the truth finally spoken, with consequences established and boundaries drawn, my family began to relax into themselves. Emma asked thoughtful questions about my business. Michael proved to be an excellent conversationalist about art and investments. Even Jessica, once she understood that her husband's scheme had failed, seemed relieved to stop pretending everything was normal. David remained quiet, processing the magnitude of what he'd almost lost. At 11:30, I opened the champagne Jessica had brought and poured it into the Irish crystal glasses. As midnight approached, we gathered in the living room to watch the countdown on television. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! As 2024 became 2025, I raised my glass and looked around at my family, complicated, flawed, human, and ultimately worth fighting for. To new beginnings, I said, and to remembering who we really are. Later, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my garden under the stars, thinking about the year ahead. Tomorrow, I would call the Morrisons to confirm their spring booking. I would review my business plans and maybe expand into new markets. I would continue living independently, successfully, and on my own terms. But tonight, I was simply Margaret Chen Williams, 72 years old and stronger than ever, surrounded by the life James and I had built together. I'd spent the past week reclaiming my power. Now I was ready to use it.